right, let's kick things off. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for an IdeaScale webinar. I'm Elizabeth Fontaine. I'm here from IdeaScale, and today I'm here with Dr. Paul Voss, who will be presenting Disruption and the Quest for Sustained Excellence. This will be an hour-long webinar with time for questions at the end of Dr. Voss's presentation. You can send those questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And then we do have the chat enabled as well for questions. Sorry, not questions, for discussion. If you want to test it out, you can say hi there. You can share where you're joining us from. It's always fun for everyone to see. And before I pass things over, I briefly would like to go over who IdeaScale is and what we do. We're an idea management solution that empowers organizations to harness crowdsourcing and drive innovation. We are government industry leaders and are one of the few FedRAMP certified platforms. We are actually established as a White House initiative, and we've been helping organizations transform their cultures for almost 15 years now. We host these webinars as a space for innovators to connect, share best practices, and learn from each other. Which brings me to my next point. In October, we're actually hosting our annual summit for government innovation. And this will be in Washington, D.C., but it will also have a virtual option. And I will share the link to join if anyone's interested in registering at the end of the webinar. Now to introduce Dr. Voss. He is an award-winning professor, published author, public speaker, and seminar leader, amongst many things. He is president of Ethicos, a consultancy specializing in culture, leadership, and executive coaching. He's also a visiting instructor at the Naval Postgraduate School and an associate professor at Georgia State University. And now I will pass things over to you, Dr. Voss. I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will share my screen. I'm hoping that, let's see, move this down. Welcome. I'm from Anaheim Hills, California, coming to you today from sunny Southern California. And I'd like to begin by, I don't know why this isn't up, examining that in human history, the average life expectancy for the first 10,000 years, that the first 40 years of our life expectancy, that's what we had, 1 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30. And then in 60 years of our life, it was 1 to 15, as I mentioned, 15 to 30, 30 to 45, 45 to 60. But now, on average, life expectancy is 80 years of age. For women, it's a little more than 80, and for men, it's a little under 80. But let's take a look at this, because this represents it. So now, 1 to 20 is the spring of our lives. In fact, if you're in college or if you make a mistake at 17 or 18, people say, well, they're still in the spring of their life. Now, 20 to 40 has become the summer of our lives, right? The sun is burning the most brightly. We're running our hottest. 40 to 60 becomes the autumn of our life. We might start harvesting some of those gains that we made. And then 60 to 80 is the winter of your life. I think this is really illuminating for a couple of reasons. In the spirit of full disclosure, I just turned 60. So I am now in the fourth quarter or the winter of my life. Now, I still feel like I'm in the autumn. I still feel like I still have that energy and that drive and that initiative. But here's an interesting question I'd like you to ask yourself. Chronologically, where do you fall in the seasons of your life? That should be a pretty easy question. Where are you? But the second question, I think, is a little more tricky. Are you happy with that? Are you happy with that season of your life? Because psychologists will tell us that sometimes when people are suffering from anxiety or depression or maybe just a little out of sorts, one of the metaphors they use is they say, I feel like I'm out of season. I feel like it's winter out, but it's really summer out, or I feel like it's summer out, but it's really winter out. So where are you in your career? Are you happy with where you are in your career? Is your career in the summer of its career? Is it the autumn? Is it the winter? That's important for innovation. And I'll tell you why, because here's a question that I'd like to think. This is Rodin's The Thinker, right? It's the philosophical posture of contemplation. What season of the life are you in? And are you comfortable with that? But here's the really important question for innovation. What season of the life is your company or organization or school or division in? If you're in the summer of your life and you've got all these energies and all of these ideas, but your organization is in the winter of its life, you can see there's going to be some mismatch there. Or if you're in the late fall of your career, the early winter of your career, and they want to reboot and start the springtime over, there's going to be a mismatch. So I'm going to ask you that question: what season of the year, how receptive to innovation is your culture? That's one of the first questions you have to ask. How am I going to maneuver in this season, in this space, in order to create a culture? And to add a little flesh to that, I want to begin by probably admitting something that might seem a little crazy. I spend a lot of time in cemeteries. I publish on burial practices because every race, every creed, every tribe, every religion, every society, and every culture has some kind of burial practice. We don't just take the dead body and throw it into the trash heap. There's some kind of ceremony, there's some kind of rite, there's some kind of ritual. I grew up in a small town in central Minnesota, and at 7 o'clock every morning, the church bells would ring to wake us up. At 12 noon, the church bells would ring. We'd go home for lunch. At 6 o'clock at night, the church bells would ring, and people would come home from work. And 10 o'clock, the church bells would ring, and it would be lights out, right? But sometimes the church bells would ring at 10:30 in the morning or 2:30 in the afternoon. And my mom would literally say to me, Paul, go on your bike, go up to the church and see who has passed away. This is long before I read John Donne's famous words where he says, no man is an island, never, because I'm involved in mankind, never ask to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And he was talking about the finite nature of life, right? There's always going to be a season of life, and the memento mori, the remembrances of death. And at least in many cemeteries, especially Christian cemeteries, you're going to have a headstone. There's going to be a name there, and then there's going to be a date, followed by another date. And then in between those dates, there's going to be a piece of punctuation. It's not a hyphen, it's called a dash. And what does that dash represent? That little piece of punctuation between the two dates. What does that represent? It represents your entire life. We all get a dash, right? So part of my professional desire is to help animate that dash, to make those dashes as viable and as dynamic and as worthwhile as possible. And one of those ways is through growth, being able to grow, being able to flourish, being able to innovate. But the dash is really important because we have to live the dash. We understand that that dash is important, and that's all you get on your tombstone. And nobody ever says on their tombstone, we wish we spent more time at work, but we do say we wish we might have accomplished more. And so what does this dash actually mean? Well, in innovation, it means really important things. How are you living the dash? How are you creating an opportunity? We're going to talk about the difference between an idea and an opportunity. So I'd ask you again, what season are you in? What season is your company in? Then I'd ask you this question. Do you have a 1-year plan, a 3-year plan? Do you have a 5-year plan? What does a 1-year plan look like for you? What does a 3-year plan look like for you? What does a 5-year plan look like for you? Do you have in that 1, 3, and 5-year plan new ideas, new opportunities? Is innovation part of that? Do you feel called to, because there is a certain calling involved in being an innovator, a disruptor? What does that outline look like? What seeds are you trying to plant? How are you trying to make this future reality? Do the goals align? Again, are the seasons of your professional career and the seasons of your current job in alignment? Because if there isn't any alignment, it's going to be difficult in order to innovate. It's already difficult enough to innovate. I'm a university professor. I understand how ossified university systems can be. Government agencies, NGOs, there's procedures and there's policies. And it's already kind of tricky to innovate in established organizations. And we're going to look at some of those difficulties. But first of all, you have to make sure that the seasons align. But in order to understand innovation, I want to begin back in 1499 in Rome, when an unknown 23-year-old Florentine took a block of white marble and made this. It's called the Pietà, and it was unveiled in 1409. It became an instant classic. This is very unusual in the history of art. It usually takes generations or decades before artistic greatness is recognized, but not so in 1499. When the Pietà was unveiled, the Romans queued up outside the St. Peter's Basilica to look at the beauty, the stunning nature of this statue, because look at the harmony, look at the symmetry, look at the proportion, look at the flowing robes. If you look closely, the fingernails, the ankle bones are rendered just beautifully. And if you look really closely, look at the fingers of the mother. They're actually pressed into the side of the flesh of the dead son, making indentations. Well, the Romans were so stunned by this, they would queue up, and one day, legend has it, 2 people said, this must be the work of Bramante. Michelangelo's hated rival, for only Bramante would have such exquisite talent. Well, the hyper-competitive Michelangelo could not abide by such misattribution, so that night he snuck into the church with a hammer and a chisel in his hand, and right across the front of the Virgin he wrote his name, Michelangelo Buonarroti feciabit. Michelangelo, a sculpturo, made this. Think about that. He wrote his name on the work of art. It's the only work of art he ever signed. It's the only work of art he ever had to sign, because when your name is associated with the Pietà, guess what? The commissions just keep rolling in. See, Michelangelo was so successful, he said, I'm always going to be a sculptor. That's all I want to do. I will never change. I was put on earth to release the image trapped inside the rock. If it was up to him, he would never have changed. He would have never adapted. He would have never moved. But he had something that I call in a forthcoming book, a Michelangelo moment. In 1508, Pope called him in. This is Pope Julius II called him in and said, I need you to paint something for me. He goes, paint something for you? I'm not a painter. I'm a sculptor. He goes, no, you need to paint something for me, a fresco. A fresco is very different than traditional painting. It's where you put wet plaster of Paris on the wall and you sketch out your images on wet plaster of Paris, and you have to paint on wet plaster of Paris. It's a big innovation. It's very different than sculpting. And then he says, by the way, I want you to do it on my ceiling. So he had to craft his brushes. He had to crush his paints. He had to stand on a scaffolding with his head cocked back, painting on the ceiling while the paint is dripping in his eyes. You see, you can see the analogy here. He had to change. He had to adapt. He had to innovate. He had to pivot. He had to put down one set of tools and pick up another set of tools. And in the 4 years and 4 months that he did this, working 12 to 14 hours a day, all by himself, he perhaps accomplished the single greatest artistic achievement in the history of the world by one person. The pivot, the adaptation, you can see the innovation here. But it wasn't just then that he pivoted. He had to pivot again in 1547. Now he's 72 years old. He lived to be 89. That's robust today. Imagine what 89 was like in the 16th century. At 72, Paul III named him Il Capo Maestro, head architect of St. Peter's. This is the largest church in the world. And in 1547, it had a problem. It did not have a dome on it. It just had a huge hole. It had the largest hole. To make a dome on something is really hard. The arches are really important. So if you look around the world, no matter where you are, I see that some of you are in South Africa and some of you are in Europe. Some of you was in The Hague. My son's in The Hague right now. Some of you are in Chicago. Look around and you'll see arches. Did you ever wonder how an arch is made? First of all, it's an amazing innovation, right? It allowed buildings to go up. It allowed water and aquifers to be transported thousands of miles. But an arch is really hard to make until you have the centering. You get brick, 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 brick. You put the mortar in there, and once it dries, you pull the centering out, and voila, you've got an arch. Well, take a look at this dome. There's no way you can put any false work in there. There's no way that you can put any kind of centering in there. He had to design and build the world's largest dome without any centering, and domes have weight, force, and thrust. Architecturally, they're very difficult to do. And at 72 years old in 1547, he had to innovate. He had to change. He had to adapt. And luckily for us, he did, because that dome still represents one of the greatest architectural achievements in the world, with the drum on the bottom and all that natural light and the lantern on the top. But we know this, and you're smart people, that you understand that we have to do this because Darwin explained this in the Origin of the Species. Remember what Darwin said. First of all, here's what Darwin didn't say. Darwin did not say it is the survival of the strongest. He never said that. If it was the survival of the strongest, we'd still have T-Rex dinosaur. He never said it was the survival of the oldest or the survival of the biggest. He never said that. He said it was the survival of the fittest. And it happened because of what he called punctured equilibrium, right? We had an ecosystem 60 million years ago where the dinosaurs were on the Earth. An asteroid hits the Yucatan Peninsula, changes the ambient temperature of the world, and the dinosaurs in a nanosecond of geological history get extinct, right? They weren't able to adapt. They weren't able to pivot. They didn't have the natural selection and the opportunity to adapt and to evolve. But we know this, and Darwin says that this is how it works, but yet many, many companies in our history, both in America and international companies, right? When I'm talking about companies like newspapers and Hollywood movies and vinyl records. They played vinyl records in Africa. They played vinyl records in China. They played vinyl records in the UK. Vinyl records were replaced, right? And Hollywood movies have been replaced. And it's called a paradigm shift. 1962, scientific structure of the scientific revolution. You've all read the book. Where one conceptual worldview is replaced by another conceptual worldview. Massive paradigm shift, the move to the digital, to the mobile, to the personal. And of course, the case study for this, if you go to the Harvard Business School or the Michigan Ross School of Business, is going to be Kodak. Because here's what happened to Kodak, right? So what was Kodak? Only the most valuable company in the world, one of the most popular companies in the world, one of the most admired companies in the world. Because what did Kodak do? They brought us happiness. Here's a human universal. There are lots of human universals. Here's a human universal. Doesn't matter what size, shape, color you are, what God you pray to, or who you love. Here's a human universal. We enjoy looking at pictures. I don't know any of you, but I bet on your phone, you've got pictures. On your desk, you've got pictures. In your office, you have pictures. Visual representation through the eyes stimulates the human brain and causes us joy. What did Kodak do? They presented pictures for us. It was called a Kodak moment. Remember, our graduations, our confirmations, our weddings, our vacations, all of those moments were captured on film. But 26 years ago, Kodak did something revolutionary, right? Talk about an innovation. They developed digital photography. They did it for medical purposes. They get CAT scans and MRIs because X-rays, great X-rays, can do bones, but they need something for soft tissue. Kodak invented digital photography. Thank you, Kodak. What a wonderful life-saving innovation. But at the same time, it was going to cannibalize their film product. They went to the CEO and they said, what are we going to do about this innovation? You've heard this story before. And he goes, don't worry about it. We're a film company. America loves film. The world loves film. We'll always be a film company. Kodak's not going anywhere. Well, let's fast forward 20 years. Guess what? Kodak's gone. And here's what happened. This is what we call, Peter J. Diamandis calls the death spiral for Kodak. When you can take a product that was in the physical world and you can digitize it, like a piece of photographic paper becomes digitized, then the next one is deception. Can't happen to us. Same thing that happened to Blockbuster. Blockbuster was CDs. Pretty soon they got digitized. Then the deception won't happen to us, won't happen to us, won't happen to us. Netflix is never going to take off. They're not selling CDs. The next thing you know, Blockbuster is bankrupt. This is what they call the disruption. People are using different means. And then the fourth bullet point here, and this is the opportunity, demonetization. It's a big word. It just means there's no money in it. So I got married 35 years ago. We had a photographer, dollar. Every picture that was taken 35 years ago cost $1 because the photographer had to develop that, turn it into a proof sheet, and put it into a photo album where you go, I want one of these, two of these, Uncle Charlie. Oh, I don't want this picture because Tommy had his eyes closed, right? Jill doesn't look good in this picture. We're not going to get that. So today, when you take a picture with the camera, it doesn't cost anything. Zero. How much does it cost to take a picture? Zero. How much does it cost to take 10,000 pictures? Zero. So you can take 1,000 pictures now and you can delete the ones that you don't like, and it's been demonetized. Then the real coup de grace, though, is dematerialization. Look at this picture here. This picture here is a picture of a typical darkroom, circa 1970. Look at the tubes, the trays, the chemicals, all the paper, the light bulbs, all the accoutrements of producing a picture. Everything you see there was ideated, it was engineered, it was manufactured, it was transported, it was wholesaled, it was retailed, it was marketed. Hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in that industry. What happened to it? Poof, eviscerated. It's gone, evaporated. The industry had been around for 150 years. How long did it take for it to get destroyed? I don't know, what, 5 years, 10 years? When was the last time you bought a roll of film? My point is, when people say this can never happen to us, we are impervious to outside forces, I say, well, maybe. That's what Kodak said. That's what Blockbuster said. The people at Blockbuster had an opportunity to buy Netflix. They go, we're not buying Netflix. People love Blockbuster. There's only one Blockbuster left in the world. It's in Bend, Oregon. Nobody's going to Blockbusters anymore because we have something now called Netflix. Do you really on a Friday night, you're already in your PJs, you're watching a movie, you're having a glass of wine. Do you want to drive across town to a Blockbuster and go to a warehouse with skeletal-like remains of movies? Or do you want to hit the Netflix button and have 10,000 movies at your disposal and have a second glass of wine? One's a better experience than the other. But as a historian, I can tell you that this disruptions happen throughout history all the time. This is one of the most important inventions in the history of the world, and it's called the printing press. But remember, Gutenberg didn't invent printing. The Chinese had printing. He didn't invent the press. We have olive presses in Orvieto that are 3,000 years old. Human beings have been pressing olives and grapes to get grape juice to turn into wine for at least 3,000, maybe 4,000 years. He took something that's called a precursor, printing, and the press, and turned it into the printing press. And of course, it might be one of the most important inventions in the history of the world because it brought literacy to the masses. Books became very affordable, and literacy just spread through the world, and universities were formed, and it changed everything. But remember, the printing press had people who were losers. There were some people who were displaced and lost their job. Imagine the poor person who sold the quills, the goose quills, right? The flight feathers, who would use it in the ink, and they would use it in order to use manuscripts. Imagine him. Yeah, I came home from work today, honey, I got fired. Why? Well, printing press just came in, and all the jobs for goose feathers have been made redundant, right? So we can see this throughout history, and we can see there's an edge toward innovation. Maybe some of you remember the word Luddites, right? Luddites happened in 1811 to 1813 in England. They said they were followers of Ned Ludd or King Ludd. This is the result of this innovation here, and this is called the mechanical loom. In 1811, people invented a mechanical way of producing twills and cottons and satins and denims, and clothing that was always made by hand was now being manufactured by machine. And these two people hated it because they knew it was an existential threat to their livelihood. Their last name was Weaver, by the way. Weavers, that's where they learned how to weave clothing from their father, their grandfather, their great-grandfather. And they were destroying this mechanical loom because they knew that it was going to displace them. Well, in 1813, King George III passed the capital bill saying anybody who destroys technology will be put to death. And the Luddites had to let technology prevail. And because of technology and because of mechanical production of clothing, most people can afford t-shirts, socks, and underwear at a low price at a Target or a Walmart. They don't take up that much of our annual income because clothing can be made relatively cheaply. So there are winners and there are losers. But let's go to current day, because I have an interest. I think it's an interesting story. About 17 years ago, I got a phone call from two venture capitalists saying, Dr. Voss, we'd like to pitch an idea to you that we're thinking of investing in. Now, people call me from time to time, not because I have any money, but they'll ask me, as a social historian, are there any norms of society that might preclude this innovation from being scaled and widely adopted? And this is when they first pitched me Uber. And they told me the story of Uber, and I remember saying, I don't think this is going to work. Now, I was catastrophically wrong, obviously, in retrospect, but here's why I didn't think it was going to work. When they explained this to me, I said, well, there's two big stumbling blocks. Number one is when you're 4, 5, or 6 years old, Mommy, can I go play outside? Yes, you can play outside on the sidewalk, but never, ever, ever, ever get into the car with a stranger. We are told from a very young age, we should never, ever, ever get into a car with a stranger. It's just drilled into our psyche. Then when we turn 16, we start driving. Mommy, can I go borrow the car tonight? Yes, you can, honey. But never, ever, ever, ever pick up a stranger. Well, what is Uber? Uber is a stranger jumping into the back of a stranger's car, and a stranger pulling over and allowing a stranger to jump in the back of a car. And I said, do you really think a 21-year-old co-ed at the University of Georgia who's had a couple cocktails will jump in the back seat of a car with a random dude? And the answer is, hell yeah, she will. All the time. There are 3 million drivers right now in 65 countries. They do 1.7 million trips every quarter. I mean, Uber has been a runaway disruptive success, and so many people have copied Uber. Think about this. In the history of innovation, in the history of disruption, no company has ever generated more top-line revenue in its first 7 years than Uber. Not Amazon. This is even adjusted for inflation. Not Facebook, not Google. Uber is the Mount Rushmore of all disruptive innovative companies to generate revenue in the first 7 years of its existence. Because, I mean, think about it. I was in Sacramento, California not too long, and I couldn't get an Uber, so I had to get a yellow cab. I remember how Uber works. Just you push the button when it first came, and a car would pull up, and it was 30% cheaper, and the driver was nice, and they maybe gave you a mint. Well, Typical yellow cab was dirty. It was smelly. I got in the back of it. It was stinky. He starts driving me around. And then we get to the place. He goes, $80. $80? Did you even have the meter on? He goes, well, how about 60? I go, oh, is this a bartering economy? I've got some bacon back here. Maybe you can give it to me for 40. So I hand him my credit card. He goes, I don't take credit cards. I go, you don't take credit cards? There's a little sign on your window that says credit cards. He's just trying to stiff me. So he goes, very well, reaches under his seat. True story. Takes out a knuckle cruncher. Remember those old knuckle crunchers? Puts my credit card in there. The handle breaks off. Then takes my card, puts the embossed numbers up onto his window and starts rubbing it off on a piece of carbon paper. And I said, wow, I am not comfortable with this. Give me the carbon. I tore it up. He goes, we got nothing to worry about unless I'm a crook. I go, that's kind of what I'm worried about. So anyway, he took me to the bank. I had to take out cash. He charged me to go to the bank. I gave him $80 and he goes, what, no tip? I go, yeah, I'll give you a tip. He goes, what? I go, you better start driving Uber because I'm never going to take a yellow cab ever again. He goes, why? I said, because of where I live. He goes, where do you live? I go, in the 21st century. And I slammed the door, right? Who would put up with that experience, that unfriendly user experience? Because that's the word that innovators have to focus on, right? So we are an economic historians, say we're in a new economic cycle. We used to be an agricultural economy, then we were an industrial economy, then we were a service economy providing services for everybody. AI is going to start providing all of those services, right? So if you are providing a world-class service, you're probably going to get replaced by computers who can provide that world-class service, including reading radiology reports and doing your taxes and being your financial advisor. Many of those jobs are probably going to atrophy. So there's only one thing left. It's called the experience economy. And one of the things that innovators do is they look around and say, how would I make this experience better? How could I possibly make this experience better? What is the value add of the experience? Because here's what we're finding out, that if you go someplace and you have a bad experience, you don't return. If you go to a restaurant and it was just average, you're not going to go back. You know why? Because there's hundreds of restaurants out there that you already like who do a good job. In fact, the Net Promoter Score tells us, so I found this was interesting when I did a deep dive, that if somebody says on a scale of 1 to 10, how did you recommend that restaurant? And they say it was an 8, that's almost the same as giving it a 0. You won't go to a restaurant if someone gives the restaurant an 8. You will consider going to the restaurant or watching the movie. They said, oh, it was a 9 out of 10. It was a 9 out of a 10. So in the experience economy, they're trying to get to 9s. In the innovation world, if you can come up with something that takes the experience from a 6 to a 9, now you are actually providing an opportunity that's going to make the innovation possible. Let me give you an example. If you just juxtapose these experiences, the Uber and the yellow cab, the Blockbuster and the Netflix, what about if you get to go away for 3 days in a charming city like Paris, or if you're in Italy or in England or in Chicago, do you really jump into a hotel? Or if you want to have a better, more authentic English experience, do you go to Airbnb? What about telemed, music, banking, happy hour? What are we doing for the experience? It's funny, the youngest of our children just went to college last year, so we're empty nesters, and I had to take him to the bank so he could get his own debit card, his own credit card, and to sign some documents. And we're sitting inside the bank, in the lobby of the bank, and he goes, hey, Dad, there's some lollipops over there. Can I have one? I go, yeah, there, you can go have a lollipop. So he comes back with 2, and he's sitting there eating a lollipop. He goes, wow, these lollipops are free. Who would have known? I said, Quinn, have you never been in a bank before? He goes, nope, first time. He's 18 years old, first time he's ever in a bank eating a free lollipop. So who is going into the bank, right? That experience of going into the bank is going to be more and more rare as the years go on. And guess what? Branches and bank sizes are getting smaller and smaller and smaller because everything he does is he banks on his phone, like probably many of you. He gets a check for grandma for Christmas. He takes a picture of it and sends it in. But let's talk about how it really kind of works, right? And why this is important for executives, managers, employees. If you fancy yourself as somebody who might want to be an innovator, what does that mean? How's providing a better experience even possible? Does it cost a lot of money? And the answer to that is it's very possible. And no, it doesn't need to cost a lot of money. Let me give you an example. So about 6 years ago, our water heater went out. I wasn't at home at the time. My wife called me. I said, well, just Google it and find a plumber. Our house was relatively new. We didn't have an established plumber, and we were living in a newer neighborhood. So she Googled water heater repair, and she found out that there were 20 or 25 plumbers who were willing to do it. So she went on to the Nextdoor app and asked the neighbors, hey, does anybody have a recommendation? Have you had a good experience recently with a plumber? And she got a recommendation. So the next day he comes over. I happen to be at home. And I'm sitting in my study, and the door rings, and I open up. I go, oh, hi, I'll show you where the water heater is. Nice to meet you. He says, excuse me, sir, do you mind if I talk to your wife? I knew exactly what he was doing. I said, sure, I'll go get her. On his invoice, my wife's name was up there. Mary Voss was up there. He probably knows that in heterosexual households, women have discretionary spending of about 85% of the income on things that happen inside the house. He wanted to get in front of the decision maker. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to get in front of the decision maker. So she comes down and she goes, okay, I'll thank you for you to come over. I'd like to show you where the water is. And he goes, one moment, ma'am. And he reaches into his back pocket and he puts these two blue booties on his shoes. Two blue booties that you see in a surgical or a dental office, maybe. And I go, what are you doing? He looks at my wife and he says, ma'am, you've got a beautiful house. I promise you two things. I'm not bringing dirt in here, and I'll clean your house, and I'll leave it cleaner than what I found it. I looked at my wife. She kind of swooned. She was so impressed. Now, he was 25 and he had 6-pack abs. Maybe that had something to do with it. But she was so impressed. But what did that cost him? 50 cents? 75%? That was his differentiator. That was his signature experience, or his concierge experience. It certainly delighted and surprised her, and she gave him a good evaluation and all this sort of thing. Let's fast forward to 6 years. A few months ago, our pressure reducing valve goes out. I'm out of town. I call her. She calls me. I go, well, I better call a plumber. She goes, I already talked to Nick. I go, who's Nick? She goes, you know Nick. I go, I don't know Nick. She goes, Paul, Blue Booties. I go, oh, Blue Booties. She remembered his name. It was 6 years later. So she makes a booty call. All of a sudden, he's over there. I think that's what the young people are calling him. He comes over there. He does and he gives her 10% off because she's been such a good client and supporter on the virtual Facebook page. So what is your blue booty? What is your signature experience? Is there an innovation out there that you can own, that you can challenge, that you can make your own, that creates a better user experience? So if someone comes to your office, are you a yellow cab or are you an Uber? If someone calls your phone system, are you a yellow cab or are you an Uber? These are really important. I'll give you one more example, and this is in the United States here. So for those of you who are international, I think you'll figure this out anyway. This is a map of the United States, and this is from Gas Buddy. This is a crowdsourced website that calculates the cheapest gas that's available in your location. So you can go online and you can find where the cheapest gas is. I don't use it very often because it's usually just a penny cheaper a gallon, and it's usually 2 miles away, so it's not really worth it. But right before COVID, they crowdsourced 100,000 people and said, what are the cleanest gas station restrooms by brand name in America? And this is what came out of this. And I saw this and I called them up and I said, wow, what's the value proposition? Remember, this is before COVID. They said that if your logo is on here, they think it might be worth upwards of $1 million of revenue to your organization every year because clean bathrooms are that important. I kind of pashad that. Now, look at Texas. There was a gas station there called Buc-ee's. It had just opened. Now, Buc-ee's has 110 gas pumps. It's a cross between a Bass Pro Shop and a Costco. They have food, they have clothing, they have everything you can imagine. But more than anything, they're known for clean bathrooms. They advertise their clean bathrooms. They pay $22 an hour for the people who clean their clean bathrooms. You go into a bathroom in a Buc-ee's, you'll be surprised. It's cleaner. I promise you, it's cleaner than the bathroom in your own house. And they even say that the person who cleans the bathroom, as I said, gets $22 an hour. That's the highest hourly wage that anybody gets in Buc-ee's because that's their priority. And now Buc-ee's is #1 in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. And the gas station's reputation is exploding because, especially during and just after COVID, people want to make sure that they have a clean bathroom. My wife isn't even a germaphobe, but sometimes she goes into a restaurant and says, kids, let's go back in the car. I just saw their bathroom, and their bathroom's so disgusting. I can only imagine what their kitchen looks like, and I'm not going to eat here. So we're driving home from Florida the other day. We live in Georgia. And my wife says, can you pull over? I have to use the restroom. I go, I can pull over here, but in 37 miles, there's a Buc-ee's. She goes, I'll wait. Think about that. She's going to wait 37 miles because she would much rather have that experience. That is innovation. That is providing a better experience, enhancing the experience. Innovations have to have a goal. Yes, they have to be durable, they have to be sustainable in the private sector, be profitable, but they have to have some kind of answer. They have to enhance an experience. That's how it's going to work. So if I ask you a question, what's the most challenging thing about your job? Is it technological? Is it disruptive? Is it resources? Is it motivation? Is it finding people to do the job? Is it getting people engaged and getting them jump started for an innovation? Is it your current culture and your habits? All of these things. But the big question is, how do you move an idea? Lots of ideas, 10,000 ideas, but an idea isn't innovation. How do you move from an idea to an opportunity that can be acted on? And one of the ways that we do that is by recognizing simply this fact. The last episode we talked, or the last slide, we talked about the experience economy. There's another economy that is being developed right now, and that's called the distraction economy. The distraction economy means that the primary interface that human beings have in the world now is with their cell phone. You see it everywhere. It's not just young, it's not just the millennials. You see it everywhere. People interfacing with their phone. This is what they call their first screen. This is their portal to the world. Even when they're watching movies or they're watching sports, especially, they'll have a first screen and a second screen. In fact, sports is an ideal second screen activity because you don't have to watch everything. And if a really cool play comes on, someone's gonna say, hey, Jill, put your phone down. You got to watch this play, and they'll show a replay, and then you'll catch it on the second screen. So the second screen and the third screens are becoming something called the distraction economy. People are making money trying to distract people and to get their attention. And so more and more people are getting some form of ADD. But there's one thing that can break through the distraction economy, and that's excellence. And when I talk about having the distraction economy, I'm talking about the power of narrative. This is really, really important, and it's an often overlooked part of innovation. If you grew up in an English-speaking world, you probably had to read in 9th or 10th grade Shakespeare. You probably were assigned to read Shakespeare. I don't know if you ever got through Julius Caesar, but even if you didn't, you probably remember the phrase where Mark Antony says, friends, countrymen, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. He's saying, listen up. It's the power of narrative, because narrative is so ubiquitous in such an integral part of our life that we can't escape narrative. In fact, some of the oldest things we have in the history of the world, 17,300 years old, are these cave paintings in southern France. These cave paintings were created in the misty recesses of prehistory, and they tell stories about the harvest, the hunt, the birth, and the death. It's Facebook 17,300 years ago. Storytelling is something that resonates with all of us. Again, it doesn't matter the size, shape, or color, any of those important metrics. None of those matter. We all, when it comes to narrative, we all resonate with stories. Think about your own life. Think about your family. Think about your community. Stories are important. Stories, in other words, are a human universal. They are completely ubiquitous. This is Toni Morrison, the late, great Nobel Prize winning writer. And she talked about her role as the gatekeeper of memory, how it's central. Storytelling is central to any civilization, any culture. But I think it's also a tool used for leaders, like people on this call. This is a tool. This is a tool you need in a toolbox, or an arrow you need in your quiver if you're going to advance any innovations in your organization. It's leading people into the future via the past. You're going to tell them something that happened in the past in order to get them to move to the future. This is the magic of storytelling. But it goes far beyond that. There is a science behind storytelling. According to Brian Boyd, all of our brains, again, we've all evolved the same way. And the default orientation task of the evolved mind is narrative. Think about that. Narrative has become the default orientation task of the human mind. Beginning, middle, end. Beginning, middle, end. All children, all adults, all grandparents understand the whole narrative and how it works. And that's how our brains think. That's how we retain information. If you're studying for something, I always tell my students, can you put it into a story? But it's even more important than that. Alison Gopnik, writing in the Wall Street Journal, talks about the science of storytelling as brains becoming literally in sync with the audience. It's almost like a Vulcan mind meld if you're into Star Trek and that sort of thing. But here's what stories do. Stories enhance our empathy. Boy, don't we want clients who have empathy? Don't we want teammates who can feel what we're feeling? Your brains literally become in sync, because Stories enhance trust. And where trust is high, this is important, resistance is low. The first thing that a person has to do in order to be a successful innovator is make sure people trust the innovator. Where trust is high, resistance is low. And here's what was even more important: the chemistry behind storytelling. We've known for years, for a long time, that when you fall in love, human physical love, you are in the presence of the beloved. There's a chemical that is processed in our brain. It's a hormone called oxytocin. And they call it the love molecule because it's the butterfly in our stomach feeling that we get when we are in love. And the brain releases this when we are in the process of human love. And in fact, it's a way that human beings bond through chemistry, because the more physical interaction you have with someone, the deeper you love them. Well, here's what we found out: that the trust factor story tells us that that chemical is also synthesized during storytelling. So that when we are in the presence of a good storyteller, we're starting to root for that person. We're starting to like that person. We're having empathy with that person, and it actually changes our brain. Well-told stories can actually change the brain. So if you have an idea that's turned into an opportunity, if you don't have a compelling narrative, if you don't have the story of how that works, you're not going to probably get everybody on board. You're not going to have the teamwork necessary, because anthropologists will tell us, this is another branch of social science, that life and work are better in the company of storytellers. We enjoy work more when we're around storytellers, and stories can help prompt action. They can help motivate. They can help us with values and that sort of thing. The Harvard Business Review, this isn't just a professor of English literature telling you there's a value of storytelling. The Harvard Business Review is saying technical experts. Many of you might be technical experts. You might be engineers, right? You might have subject matter expertise, but we've all been in those presentations where the smart PhD from MIT or the smart PhD from Cape Town, South Africa gets up there and start talking, and our eyes just glaze over because they're so smart that they're giving us nothing but data, facts, and figures, and it's not resonating with us. Because facts are poor storytellers. Technical experts especially need to get better at telling stories. Those of you who are technical experts realize that that data is important. Put it into some kind of PDF file and hand it out. But you need to pitch your ideas. You need to tell your stories. And the essentials of storytelling are usually the same. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and end. But all stories, all rom-coms, if you want to talk about romantic comedies, all have the same basic narrative arch. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back, right? That same narrative arch. There has to be some kind of narrative tension. If there's no tension, and think about this story. I was born rich and good looking. I married rich and good looking. I died rich and good looking. And every day was unmitigated bliss for 70 years, blah, blah, blah. That's a horrible story. That's gross, right? Nobody wants to hear that. We need to hear a story that reveals something about you, that reveals the blood, sweat, toil, and tears that went into the idea that is now becoming your commanding, innovative, opportunity. But the tension, that narrative tension, it reveals something about you, about your animating principles, about your hopes, your goals, your dreams, your losses, your frustrations. And of course, in a short webinar like this, we can't get into all of it, but here's the question. Do you have a story? What is your story? Here it is, August 1st, 2024. What is your story? Right? In a job interview, that's what I always, hey, so give me your story. And there's a wah, 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 wah. Is it consistent? Is it credible? Is it compelling? Is it concise, right? So if someone says, well, to make a long story short, I got news for you. If you say to make a long story short, you're already too long. Right? How does it jumpstart a conversation? What does it mean to be able to tell a story in the service of innovation? And let me give you an example. So let me show you an example of a short story. This isn't my story. It's not a story that burning airplane or life or death shark attack. It's a very modest story. It's a story that anybody can use, and feel free to use the story if you want to. It took me about, 3 minutes of research to become expert in this story. It would take you about 3 minutes of research to be more expert than anybody else in this story, but it also will help jumpstart a conversation. So I want to talk about two concepts: innovation and sustainability, right? These are very woolly concepts. They have lots of different ideas. It's hard to have a conversation about that. So let's have this test case right here. I'm going to talk about agility and adaptation with the peppered moth. I hope you can see that picture right there. There's a peppered moth there. Look how beautifully it's camouflaged. The peppered moth existed in England for centuries. It was ubiquitous. Chaucer mentions the peppered moth. Shakespeare mentions the peppered moth. It was perfectly camouflaged, but it was a source of food, and it was an essential part of the ecosystem, right? It really played an important role in the ecosystem for century after century after century. But something happened in the Industrial Revolution, 1760 to 1840, roughly. And that smokestack after smokestack after smokestack was being built, belching out black carbon-based smoke into the atmosphere. And guess what? All the trees in England started to turn black. Now we've got a white peppered moth on a black tree. Obviously, this is not optimal. This is making him a very big target risk. It's an existential threat for the survival of the species. There's something that's going to happen. And surprisingly, in a short period of time, I hope you can see just under this picture, it changed into a black form. It morphed, adapted, and evolved, innovated, if you want to use that word, for the successful perpetuation of the species, just as Darwin predicted. We saw it in real time. It was stunning because it didn't have any other choice. But here's what's interesting. In 1840, roughly around there, the Industrial Revolution ends, and then the trees start turning white again. Now we have the inverse problem. We have a black moth on a white tree. It's back again, reverting to sitting targets. And guess what? Look at the moth there. And then it had to readapt and reevaluate. We call that permanent beta. Innovation is permanent beta. Software is never done. Fashion never ends, right? Fashion, there's never an end to fashion. Fashion keeps changing. Fashion keeps evolving. That's what innovation. How are we creating an experience? What are we doing in order to adapt for the survival of our species, to make sure that our program, our process, our product continues to go? Start small. What would make this a better experience? How in the world am I going to move forward and make this a better experience? So the simple 3-minute story there, this is a discussion you could have with your team. And I'm going to send these slides to Lizzie, and she can set, if you request a copy of the slides, I think there's some good information on them. I think it would ask a really important question. Are the colors of your world changing right now? Where you are, where you're sitting in your office, at your desk, are the colors of your world, your professional world, changing? If so, is your organization similar to a peppered moth? Have you adapted? Well, some people say, no, we haven't adapted at all. We're that white peppered moth on the black tree, and guess what? The woodpecker is going to come and eat us right now. We're toast. Have we adapted? Some people say, yeah, we've adapted. And I said, well, have you adapted again? Are you going to be able to readapt? What are your solutions? What are your recommendations? How is this going to play out? Because my reading of the tea leaves, if you want to know, is that there's going to be continual adaptation. There's going to be continual innovation. The world's not going to get simpler. It's going to get more complicated. And there's going to be the speed with which it happens is going to increase. And so I think we're going to have our antenna up, and we're going to have to make sure that, like the peppered moth, we're continually aware that things might change, because you need to have a narrative. Everybody needs to have a narrative. If you don't have a narrative on innovation or user experience, if you don't have a blue booty, if you don't have a clean bathroom, if you don't have a what or a how in your own career, it's going to make it much more difficult to get this off and running. So with that being said, I'll say that here are some additional resources. These are some of the excellent books that are out there right now that you could have. The Leader's Guide to Storytelling is really quite good. Building a Story Brand. A lot of you probably know about leading with a story. You can also go onto my LinkedIn page. Go to my LinkedIn, Paul J. Voss. It's under the video series. They're free, no cost at all. Each video is only 3 minutes long. Tens of thousands of people have watched them. It gives you a step-by-step process of how you might start creating those own narratives, and how you might videotape a narrative, and what to include in the narrative and what not to include in the narrative. But those might be good points of discussion. But the biggest threat to anything that we've talked about today, before I hand it back to Lizzie and to the others if there are any questions, is something that Sir Isaac Newton first discussed in 1687. He might have been one of the most brilliant men in the world. He was born in 1642 on Christmas Day, and he invented calculus when he was 20 years old. He never told anybody about it for a couple of decades. I really wish he kept his mouth shut. My junior year of college would have been a lot easier without calculus 1 and calculus 2. Thank you, Sir Isaac Newton. But he came up with this concept of inertia. We all know what inertia is. Inertia is the tendency of an object at rest to stay at rest, or an object in motion to stay in motion. Inertia can kill careers. Inertia can kill friendships. Inertia can kill marriages. one thing we have to do in order to innovate is to overcome the force of gravity and overcome inertia. And in order to do that, we need to have a compelling narrative. And in my modest remarks today, the short abbreviated remarks today, I hope that you start thinking about what kind of narrative you're going to have to enhance the experience and move the idea toward an opportunity as you continue to move the innovation train down the track. But at that rate, anyway, I know I'm out of time here. Lizzie, do we have any questions? What can I do for the audience here?
Thank you. That was such a great presentation. If anyone does have questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. I have one to start us off, though.
Please.
So do you have any advice on how leaders can inspire and motivate their teams to embrace disruption and continuous innovation?
That's an excellent question. And again, I think that most thoughtful people will look around today and say it's a fact of life. If anybody thinks that they can just stay static in this environment and continue to flourish, I think they're misguided and they're kidding themselves. So I think that the argument in favor of innovating and staying current and updated probably doesn't need to be made. But my advice would be, if you have an idea, to come up with this compelling story, a story that has some tension. Because when you tell that story and you offer a solution, remember, rom-coms always meet boy, lose boy. They always get the boy back at the end. There has to be some harmony. That's your call to action. When you articulate the problem, when you articulate the lack of the fine experience, you have to come up with the solution. And if you come up with a compelling solution, people will naturally gravitate toward that. So the leader has to either be the person or find the person on the team who's going to be the chief storyteller. And I know this is going to sound like a lot of work, because it is a lot of work. That story gets told over and over and over and over again. It's the chief evangelizer of that innovative idea. And if you don't have a compelling story, and you're already working in a difficult, innovative environment, you're just making that job exponentially more difficult.
I love the idea of a chief storyteller. That sounds so fun.
Yeah, and you know what? A lot more, if you look on LinkedIn or job posts, that's one of the titles that is growing, trending right now, is the storyteller. Who is our chief storyteller? Sometimes it's called a brand ambassador, but it's much more than just an influencer, right? An influencer, I know what it is, but such a generic term. Chief storyteller is a specific term.
Mm-hmm. I love that. We have another question here. In
Great.
large corporations, sometimes innovation teams are set up to work on innovation-related projects full-time. How do you encourage the rest of the company to keep an innovation mindset when it is not seen as their job anymore?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And here's what the research says on that is, generally speaking, when you set up an innovation cell or an innovation team, it doesn't work out as intended, because then people say, oh, we've already got innovation taken care of over there. And then they feel like they're not responsible for coming up with any innovative ideas. That is not my job description. So if you are part of a team, the whole company is supposed to be at least open to the possibility of innovation. And when they put the tag on, this is our innovation cell over here, our innovation experts over here, it actually, according to the evidence, actually has maybe an unintended consequence of actually decreasing the amount of innovation that actually happens. Innovation, we all have an obligation to make a workplace safer, right? We have a safety officer, I get that, but safety is everybody's job. We have a chief financial officer, but profit is everybody's job. Even if we have a chief innovation officer, innovation is really everyone's job. If somebody has an idea that makes something built upon a precursor model more efficient, healthier, safer, more profitable, innovation is everybody's job. It really is. And so the most current research suggests that setting up these labs, setting up these innovation cells and putting them off balance sheet, even in a different state, do not yield the results of an overall culture of innovation. And I can give you by the way, I can give you the bibliography on that as well.
No, I completely agree. I mean, IdeaScale, we're an idea management software. So the whole purpose of our software is to get everyone involved.
Everybody.
Their job isn't just an innovation title. So
apex to base, right? We're talking about apex to base. And everybody is responsible for safety. Everybody's responsible. The chief innovation officer then is to cull through the ideas and see which of them lead to opportunities. But everybody should be saying, how can we make this a better experience?
I love that. We'll make this the last question here. What is the very first step when you want to innovate, but you just don't know where to start? Maybe you want to be a disruptor, but you're not sure where to start.
Again, great question. You look around and say, if I were the boss, if I were the king, if I were the queen, what change would I make around here to make this a better experience with this product? So even going to a concert the other night, I'm going to date myself, but you already know I'm 60. My wife and I went to Foreigner and Styx. These are 80s rock bands. And actually Foreigners, it's funny, it's just a cover band now because none of the original members of Foreigner are actually in the band Foreigner anymore, right? So none of them, well, half of them are dead, but none of them are in. And my first instinct is to look around and say, wow, if I were here, I would change this. I would change this. This would be more efficient. I was looking for bottlenecks. I was looking for pressure points. Anything that causes any kind of anxiety, disruption, or aggravation is an opportunity to innovate. Anything that is missing from the equation. So if you look around your landscape and everything is hunky-dory, that's the philosophical term. If everything is operating smoothly and you have no consternation at all, I guess maybe we don't need to innovate. But most of us would look around and say, well, this could be fine-tuned. This could be fine-tuned. I'd change. So I would look around and say, what are the pain points in your own life? What are the headache issues or the heartburn issues in your life, and how can we alleviate them? Because if you have them, other people probably have them. And if you have them, your clients probably have them, and your customers have them, and your coworkers have them. So that's one of the ways that you can do it, to find out where those bottlenecks are, or where those, what we call pain points. Where are the pain points here, and how can we alleviate them?
Makes sense. Thank you. I think that is the end of our questions.
Okay.
And the end of our webinar. Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Voss. It was great.